August 31st, 1939. Gleiwitz, Upper Silesia, a small industrial border town in southern Germany. The streets are quiet, workers returning home from the mines. Factory whistles fading in the distance. Patrols from the SS and border guards move through checkpoints, their boots crunching over gravel roads near the Polish frontier. German trucks sit lined up under blackout conditions, engines waiting. In Berlin, messages move through the chain of command with unusual urgency. The plan is set, and tonight, German troops will stage an attack on themselves to justify a war against Poland. This is how SS operatives faked a Polish assault to trigger Hitler's invasion, the deception that became known as the Gleiwitz incident. For weeks, Germany's eastern border had been on edge. Newspapers carried stories of Polish aggression, border raids, sabotage, and the killing of ethnic Germans. Almost all of it was false, planted by Joseph Goebbels' propaganda ministry to prepare the public for conflict. Behind those reports, in the offices of the Reich Main Security Office, the real operation was underway. It was called Operation Himmler, directed by Reinhard Heydrich under orders from Heinrich Himmler himself. Its purpose was simple: fabricate enough evidence to make it appear that Poland had attacked first. Gleiwitz was one of several sites chosen for the deception, but it would become the most famous. The town's small radio station, broadcasting in both German and Polish, sat less than 10 kilometers from the border. Its location made it ideal for a staged cross-border raid, close enough to Poland to seem plausible, yet secure enough for German control. Late in the afternoon, an SS commando team led by Alfred Naujocks received final orders from Berlin: seize the station, broadcast an anti-German message in Polish, and leave behind proof of a violent skirmish. That proof would be human bodies. Prisoners taken from nearby concentration camps had been quietly transferred to the border. They were drugged, dressed in Polish army uniforms, and referred to in SS slang as Konserven, canned goods. Their deaths would serve as physical evidence of Polish attackers killed or dead during the raid. As night approached, clouds moved low over Silesia. The radio tower at Gleiwitz blinked against the dark horizon, its signal carrying across both borders. Inside the Reich Chancellery, Hitler waited for confirmation. The invasion of Poland was set for dawn, but the propaganda narrative had to be ready before the first tanks moved. A single broadcast, a few seconds of fabricated defiance, would become his justification for war. By midnight, the men were in position. The border was quiet, but the deception had already begun. Within hours, the world would hear that Polish forces had struck Germany. The truth, however, was far more precise and far more deliberate. Germany had attacked itself. In Berlin, the corridors of power no longer slept. Late-night meetings filled the Chancellery, and telephones rang behind closed doors. Within the Reich Main Security Office, the head of Germany's secret police, Reinhard Heydrich, sat over a map of the Polish border. Around him, intelligence officers from the SS and the Abwehr reviewed coded reports, names of border towns, and lists of potential targets. Their orders had come directly from the highest level to make it appear as though Poland had attacked Germany first. Under Heydrich's direction, SS and SD officers were instructed to plan incidents along the border: railway raids, attacks on customs posts, even shootings staged near villages. The goal was to create chaos that could be blamed on Poland. In total, more than 20 false flag operations were designed. Some would be simple and unnoticed. Others would be brutal and theatrical. Gleiwitz, with its radio station, was chosen to stand at the center, the incident that could be broadcast across the world. The preparations were as methodical as any military campaign. Polish uniforms were gathered from captured stocks. Vehicles were repainted with Polish markings. Weapons and ammunition of Polish origin were quietly distributed to SS units assigned to the tasks. To ensure realism, Heydrich ordered that casualties be provided, prisoners taken from concentration camps, selected because they could not be traced. They were told they were being released, then sedated and delivered to the border. They would be found dead, wearing Polish insignia, as proof of the attack. Every document, every order, every movement was controlled through Himmler's office. Alfred Naujocks, the SS officer, chosen to lead the Gleiwitz mission, received his briefing in mid-August. He was told that the action would be part of a larger operation of utmost importance to the Reich. His instructions were direct: seize the Gleiwitz radio station, broadcast a short Polish message announcing an uprising, leave the bodies as evidence, and withdraw. The entire event was to last no more than 15 minutes. By August 31st, everything was in motion. Hitler was already waiting for confirmation that his pretext was secure. "I will give the propagandists a reason for starting the war," he had told his generals earlier that week. "Whether it is credible or not, the victor will not be asked if he told the truth." For the men in the SS, that statement defined their mission. Truth no longer mattered, only the appearance of it did. Operation Himmler was not designed to fool the enemy, it was meant to fool the world. As evening approached, Heydrich's final orders went out from Berlin. Every officer knew the timing. The Gleiwitz action would occur between 8 and 9 p.m. Reports would follow immediately to confirm the incident. The invasion, already positioned along the Polish frontier, would begin before dawn. The deception would be complete before the first real bullet was fired. In military terms, the plan was elegant in its simplicity, a deception built like an equation. Cause: a Polish attack on German soil. Effect: Germany's justified retaliation. Between those two lines lay a fabrication so carefully engineered that it could hold up under diplomatic scrutiny. Inside SS headquarters, technicians, field officers, and propagandists all played their part. Cables had to be cut, radios seized, and evidence arranged to match the story. The Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence service under Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, provided logistical support, though Canaris himself quietly disapproved of the scheme. He understood what it meant, manufacturing an act of war. But opposition was dangerous. To question Hitler's plan was to risk one's life. At Gleiwitz, Alfred Naujocks reviewed his orders one last time. His unit consisted of a handful of trusted SS men in plain uniforms and several drivers from the Sicherheitsdienst. Their Polish disguises were already prepared: mismatched boots, insignia sewn unevenly onto tunics, and old rifles made to look authentic. Every detail mattered, because the photographs that would follow would need to convince not only German citizens, but also foreign journalists and intelligence services. The operation's design extended beyond Gleiwitz. Near the town of Bytom, another team was set to stage an assault on a German customs post. Farther north, false attacks would be reported at Pitchen and Hochlinden. Together, these incidents would create the image of widespread Polish aggression. The propaganda ministry under Joseph Goebbels had already prepared the press statements. By morning, headlines across Germany would tell of Polish raids, murdered border guards, and acts of provocation. The world would see Poland as the instigator, exactly as Berlin intended. To ensure timing, the SS used coded teletypes and phone lines that connected border posts directly with Heydrich's office. Each unit would report completion with a single phrase, Unternehmen erledigt, meaning operation completed. Only then could the next phase begin. Behind the scenes, German army commanders along the frontier were briefed that they might hear reports of border skirmishes during the night. They were told not to intervene unless ordered. Most believed these would be minor incidents. Few knew that the incidents were entirely fabricated. By dusk, the blueprint of a lie was complete. Gleiwitz would deliver the broadcast, and the world would hear the voice of a supposed Polish insurgent, proclaiming an attack on Germany. The rest would unfold like a chain reaction. Press releases, military orders, diplomatic protests. Within hours, Hitler would declare that Germany had been forced to defend itself. The war would have its justification. As night fell over Upper Silesia, the border grew still. The truth was about to be rewritten in real time, not through words, but through an act of deliberate theatre. In a few hours, the radio tower at Gleiwitz would speak for a nation, and every word it said would be a lie. By nightfall, the trucks had arrived. Their headlights were covered, and their engines idled quietly on the outskirts of Gleiwitz. Inside, SS men adjusted their stolen Polish uniforms, mismatched tunics with hastily sewn insignia, unfamiliar helmets, and boots that didn't fit. They looked like soldiers, but not quite. Their orders were clear. They were to appear Polish, but not perfectly so. The goal was not authenticity, it was believability. Each man had been told the same thing. This was a matter of national security. No questions, no hesitation. Those who asked too many questions were replaced. The men had trained for weeks in silence, memorizing Polish phrases and learning how to handle captured weapons. They were told this action would prevent another great war, that it would protect Germany's borders and its people. In truth, they were about to become actors in a staged crime, soldiers performing a lie. In a nearby farmhouse, Alfred Naujocks reviewed the plan once more with his team. He read the written order signed by Reinhard Heydrich himself. The station is to be seized for a short time. Broadcast an anti-German statement in Polish. Leave evidence. Withdraw. It was simple, but the implications were immense. Heydrich's language was always clinical, detached. There was no mention of killing, no discussion of prisoners, only evidence. Everyone in the room understood what that meant. At a nearby border outpost, another truck had arrived carrying the prisoners, men taken from Dachau concentration camp earlier that day. They had been selected because they were Polish or spoke the language. They had been told nothing of their fate. Each was sedated by SS doctors and dressed in Polish army uniforms. To the officers overseeing the operation, they were simply referred to as Konserven, canned goods. The word turned human lives into objects, stripped of identity. It was bureaucratic cruelty reduced to a single term. As the SS prepared, Naujocks reminded his men that the operation would be brief. 15 minutes, he said, no mistakes. They would cut the telephone lines to the station, force entry, and have the radio engineer transmit their short message. Then they would fire several shots, leave the prisoners' bodies at the scene, and disappear back across the border. Everything would be reported as an attack by Polish saboteurs. Outside, the wind carried the faint hum of the Gleiwitz transmitter, its red aviation light blinking across the fields. The men loaded their weapons, checked their watches, and waited for the signal from Berlin. One by one, they pulled their collars high and stepped into the dark. Their uniforms bore no names, no rank, no flag, only borrowed symbols meant to deceive. By 10 minutes to 8, the unit was in motion. The trucks crept along the narrow country road toward the radio station. Inside, the engineer on duty noticed the lights approaching, unaware that the vehicles carried his countrymen, disguised as his enemies. The deception was minutes away from unfolding. The men of the SS, German soldiers, dressed as Poles, were about to ignite the spark that would justify a war. The Gleiwitz radio station stood on a quiet road, surrounded by pine trees and low fields. It was small, modern, and unguarded, a regional transmitter serving the Upper Silesian area. To the men approaching in the darkness, it appeared almost harmless, its single antenna tower rising above the mist. But for the SS, this building was more than a target. It was a stage. What would happen inside tonight would be broadcast across Europe by morning. At precisely 8 p.m., Naujocks gave the order. The SS men stormed the entrance, forcing their way past the startled operator. Shots were fired into the air, not to kill, but to create panic. The guards and technicians were ordered to the floor, while the unit's radio specialist took control of the transmitter. The message, prepared earlier, was short and direct. A declaration in Polish claiming that the station had been captured by insurgents fighting against Germany. It lasted less than a minute. Accounts of the exact words vary, but witnesses later recalled something like, "Attention! This is Gleiwitz. The station is in Polish hands. The time of Germany's downfall has come." The broadcast ended abruptly as the SS man switched off the transmitter. In Berlin, listening posts confirmed that the signal had been received, proof enough that the message had gone out. The attack was officially underway. Within minutes, the final part of the operation began. The truck carrying the prisoners pulled up outside the gate. The sedated men were dragged out, positioned near the building, and shot at close range. Their bodies were left behind in Polish uniforms. To anyone who arrived later, journalists, police, or military investigators, the scene would look like a violent border raid by Polish saboteurs. Photographs would show the corpses, the weapons, and the damaged radio equipment. It was evidence created to order. Inside, Naujocks made sure the transmitter was disabled to prevent suspicion. He left the building at 8:45. Within an hour, the SS unit was back on the German side of the border. The operation had lasted barely 15 minutes. No firefight, no pursuit, just a brief, controlled act of theatre. At headquarters, the coded message was sent, Unternehmen erledigt. The operation was complete. That night, the local police in Gleiwitz were told that Polish raiders had attacked the station. The report was filed immediately and forwarded to Berlin. By morning, the story would be printed in every German newspaper, read aloud on every radio broadcast, and used as the justification for invasion. As the men returned to their base, the border fell silent again. The victims lay where they had been placed, their identities erased. Above them, the radio tower still blinked red through the fog, a signal that had carried not truth, but a lie powerful enough to begin a world war. The first sound came at 8 o'clock sharp, a brief crackle over the transmitter, followed by a burst of static. Inside the control room of the Gleiwitz radio station, the SS operator adjusted the dials, his hands steady despite the tension. Then, in broken Polish, the message began. It lasted only a few seconds, but its intent was clear. Poland, it declared, had struck back against Germany. "Attention! This is Gleiwitz. The station is in Polish hands," the voice said. "The time of German tyranny is over." Then silence. It was a small, stilted performance, broadcast across the airwaves of Upper Silesia, just powerful enough to be captured by nearby monitoring posts, and short enough to sound spontaneous. In Berlin, where the transmission was expected, a staff officer in the propaganda ministry checked his watch and nodded. The signal had gone out. The incident was now official. In the town below, few residents noticed. The signal from Gleiwitz was a regional frequency. Only those tuning in by chance would have heard the strange announcement before it cut abruptly to static. For the SS men inside the station, the task was over almost as soon as it began. They fired several shots to leave evidence of violence, overturned chairs, scattered papers, and left behind empty shell casings, the details that would make the scene believable. At 8:45, Naujocks' team withdrew, leaving the transmitter disabled. On their way out, they passed the bodies placed by the entrance, men who could no longer speak, now dressed in Polish uniforms. The air was cold, the smell of gunpowder faint in the damp night. It was not a battle, but it looked like one. A few minutes later, police in Gleiwitz received an urgent call reporting shots at the radio station. Officers arrived to find chaos, blood, bodies, and damage. The witnesses spoke of attackers shouting in Polish. The report was forwarded up the chain within the hour, and by 10 p.m., the story had reached Berlin. Goebbels' ministry was already drafting headlines. By dawn, Germany would announce to the world that Polish forces had invaded. To the average German listener, the proof would sound convincing. A broadcast in Polish, a destroyed radio station, and dead soldiers wearing Polish uniforms. The illusion was complete. And somewhere near the border, as the SS convoy rolled back into German territory, Alfred Naujocks sat silently in the back of a truck. He later described the moment as cold and mechanical. His men said nothing. They had done their job exactly as ordered. The operation had succeeded. But none of them could yet know that those few seconds of radio static would echo into history as the moment the Second World War began. The bodies left at Gleiwitz were not the only ones. Across the border zone that night, similar incidents unfolded according to the same pattern. At Hochlinden, SS men fired on a border post, leaving behind prisoners in Polish uniforms. At Bytom and Pitchen, other teams carried out fake raids, planting corpses as evidence of supposed Polish aggression. The victims, prisoners taken from Dachau and other camps, had been selected days earlier. They were transported under heavy guard, told only that they were being transferred for release or work duty. None of them survived the night. To the SS, they were simply materials for the operation, categorized as Konserven, canned goods. It was a term that reduced them to expendable items, tools for political theatre. At Gleiwitz, investigators arrived before midnight. Among them were officers from the local police and members of the Gestapo. They photographed the bodies, recorded bullet holes, and measured the shell casings. Everything was documented meticulously to appear legitimate. Within hours, official reports described the attack as an organized Polish operation involving armed insurgents. The fabricated evidence was complete. In Berlin, Reinhard Heydrich received confirmation from Naujocks. "The incident at Gleiwitz has occurred," the message read. It was enough. The next step was for Joseph Goebbels to craft the narrative. Before dawn, the Reich Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda had prepared radio bulletins and newspaper articles claiming that Polish troops had launched several unprovoked assaults on German border stations. Each report cited casualties, destroyed property, and acts of aggression, all invented. For the Nazi leadership, it was a masterstroke of manipulation. By morning, the German public would believe their nation had been attacked. Hitler could stand before the Reichstag and present the invasion as an act of self-defense. The groundwork for war was complete. But for the men who had carried out the operation, the memory of what they had seen lingered. The sight of the prisoners, drugged, shot, and left in the dirt, was not easily forgotten. Some would later speak of it quietly after the war, describing how they followed orders without knowing the full purpose. Others never spoke at all. By the time the bodies were collected and buried in secret, their purpose had been fulfilled. They were never identified, their names erased from records. The deception they were used for, however, would live on as one of history's most notorious false flag operations. A crime that succeeded precisely because it looked so ordinary. In the early hours of September 1st, 1939, as the reports of Polish aggression reached Berlin, Adolf Hitler prepared his speech to the Reichstag. The radio incident had given him exactly what he needed, an excuse to unleash war. The victims of Gleiwitz, the nameless, voiceless dead, had become the opening act in the deadliest conflict the modern world had ever seen. Dawn broke cold and grey over Berlin on the 1st of September, 1939. Rain clouds hung low above the Reich Chancellery, and the city's air raid sirens, still unused, sat silent against the rooftops. Inside, Adolf Hitler stood before his generals and ministers, pale and determined, holding a single sheet of paper. News had arrived before sunrise. Polish forces have attacked the radio station at Gleiwitz. It was the sentence he had been waiting for. The deception had done its work. Reports poured in through the night from SS field offices, claiming repeated Polish incursions along the frontier. At Hochlinden, Pitchen, and Gleiwitz, they said, Polish saboteurs had crossed the border, fired on German personnel, and been repelled. To anyone outside the operation, it looked like coordinated aggression. Inside Berlin, the machinery of propaganda was already in motion. Joseph Goebbels' office issued a nationwide radio broadcast at 6 a.m., describing the attacks as intolerable acts of Polish hostility. At 9 a.m., Hitler addressed the Reichstag. The speech was calm, rehearsed, and theatrical. He told the assembled deputies and foreign press that German territory had been violated, that Polish troops had fired the first shots, and that he had ordered the Wehrmacht to respond. Since 5:45 this morning, he declared, we have been returning fire. Those words, precise and deliberate, would be remembered forever. A public justification, built entirely on a lie. At that very moment, the German army, the Luftwaffe, and armoured divisions under Heinz Guderian were already deep inside Polish territory. The invasion had begun hours before the Reichstag even convened. The men who had carried out the Gleiwitz operation were never mentioned. Their work was invisible, their names omitted from every official record. Yet without them, this morning's declaration might not have been possible. Operation Himmler had succeeded, not in convincing the world entirely, but in giving Germany the appearance of justification. And in politics, appearance was enough. As Hitler spoke, the audience erupted into applause. Outside, crowds gathered around radios in cafes and train stations, believing that their country had been attacked. In Warsaw, air raid sirens began to wail as German bombers crossed the Vistula River. In London and Paris, ambassadors demanded explanations that Berlin no longer cared to provide. For the officers who had engineered the false attack, the success felt hollow. Reinhard Heydrich, in his report to Himmler later that day, wrote that the incidents proceeded as planned. His language, as always, was clinical. No mention of the dead, no mention of the prisoners used as evidence. To him, the operation had been a technical success. To history, it was the moment when a lie became war. By midday, the German newsreels were already editing footage of tanks rolling across Polish fields, narrated with claims of defending the fatherland. The justification had worked. The world now faced a war that began not with an attack, but with a performance. Across Europe, the reaction was one of disbelief. In London, officials in the Foreign Office listened to the German broadcasts and noted inconsistencies in the reports. The supposed Polish attacks had occurred at several locations, hundreds of kilometers apart, all at nearly the same time. Yet the German government insisted they were coordinated raids by Polish saboteurs. Few believed it, but for a few crucial days, disbelief did not translate into action. In Paris, the French cabinet met in emergency session. Prime Minister Édouard Daladier was cautious, unwilling to declare war without consultation with Britain. In London, Neville Chamberlain, the man who had signed the Munich Agreement only a year earlier, struggled to accept that Hitler had once again broken his word. The German ambassador, Joachim von Ribbentrop, presented Berlin's version of events, that Germany had been attacked and that its military operations were defensive. Diplomats recognized the lie instantly, but they had no evidence to disprove it. The news from Poland told a different story. German aircraft were bombing civilian rail stations, armored columns were pushing across the border, and Wehrmacht troops were advancing rapidly toward Krakow and Łódź. The scale of the assault left no doubt. This was not a response. It was an invasion planned long in advance. But the propaganda continued to work inside Germany. The people heard only that their homeland had been threatened. They believed their army was protecting them. In the following 48 hours, Europe waited. Britain and France issued ultimatums demanding Germany withdraw from Poland immediately. Hitler ignored them. His generals were already executing falsified, the invasion plan that had been rehearsed for months. Meanwhile, Goebbels's propaganda machine flooded newspapers with staged photographs of the Gleiwitz victims, the Polish attackers lying near the radio tower. Those images, though false, became official proof. At the League of Nations in Geneva, representatives debated how to respond. Some still hoped for negotiation. Others saw the truth. Diplomacy had failed, and the world was on the brink. On September 3rd, when Germany refused to cease its attack, Britain and France declared war. The illusion of self-defense collapsed under the weight of reality. For the men who had staged the Gleiwitz operation, their role was already buried beneath military triumphs and propaganda. The incident had achieved its purpose. It had given Hitler a plausible reason to start the war and just enough time to act before the world united against him. What had begun as a short broadcast and a handful of corpses had now become a global conflict. Europe held its breath, but the silence broke quickly. Within weeks, Poland was carved apart. Within months, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, and France would fall. And as millions prepared for years of war, few realized that the first step toward it had not been a battle, but a broadcast. A single staged voice in the night declaring a war that had already been decided. In the days that followed the Gleiwitz attack, the truth disappeared beneath layers of propaganda. German newspapers filled their front pages with photographs of Polish saboteurs, and the radio repeated the story of border raids until it became accepted fact. Inside Germany, the public had no reason to doubt it. They saw their soldiers marching east under the claim of defense, not conquest, and for most, that was enough. But outside the Reich, skepticism grew. British and French intelligence analysts examined the timing, the reports, and the geography, and quickly recognized the impossibility of Poland launching so many simultaneous assaults. By the end of the first week of September, Allied officials privately concluded that the Gleiwitz broadcast had been staged, yet the damage was already done. The pretext had served its purpose. Hitler had his war. Within days, German forces captured Krakow, bombed Warsaw, and split the Polish army in two. On September 17th, the Soviet Union invaded from the east under its secret agreement with Germany, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Poland was crushed between two powers, its resistance heroic but hopeless. And in Berlin, the Reich leadership congratulated itself on the efficiency of its deception. Operation Himmler had not fooled everyone, but it had delayed opposition just long enough for invasion to succeed. For the men who executed the plan, their roles were soon forgotten. Alfred Naujocks, the SS officer who led the Gleiwitz raid, continued to serve in the Sicherheitsdienst until 1944, when he defected to the Allies. In his post-war testimony at the Nuremberg trials, he confirmed the operation's details: the fake uniforms, the prisoners, the broadcast, and the orders from Reinhard Heydrich himself. His statement provided the world with its first clear account of how the war had begun, with a lie. The revelation shocked the post-war world. The Gleiwitz incident became a case study in how governments manufacture justifications for aggression, how propaganda can distort truth so completely that it turns murder into policy. Historians later uncovered the internal SS documents confirming the operation's planning, proving beyond doubt that Germany had orchestrated the entire event to legitimize its invasion. The supposed Polish attackers were victims, prisoners killed to create evidence. Yet perhaps the most chilling truth of all was how easily the deception had worked. For a few crucial hours, it gave the illusion of legitimacy to the most catastrophic conflict in human history. In that sense, the Gleiwitz incident was more than a single act of manipulation. It was the opening scene of a global tragedy. By the war's end in 1945, tens of millions were dead. Cities lay in ruins, and entire nations had been erased from maps. But it had all begun with a 15-minute broadcast from a small radio tower on the German-Polish border. No artillery barrage, no declaration, no warning, just a fabricated message and a few bodies staged as proof. From that lie, the world descended into 6 years of devastation. After the war, the Gleiwitz transmitter returned to quiet use, and the surrounding fields grew over the scars of 1939. Today, the building still stands in modern Gleiwitz, Poland, preserved as a reminder of what happens when truth is weaponized. Visitors walk through the silent halls where the false broadcast once echoed, and the air carries a sense of uneasy calm. The equipment is gone, the cables removed, but history remains embedded in the walls. The Gleiwitz incident endures not because of its size, but because of its meaning. It showed how easily war can be born from manipulation, how a single act of deceit, delivered through the right channels, can ignite entire nations. For Germany, it began as a small radio signal in Silesia. For the world, it became the firestorm of the Second World War. In the end, the deception accomplished what it was designed to do. It gave Hitler a reason. But history remembers the truth, not the excuse. The Gleiwitz broadcast stands as a warning from the past, that the first weapon in any war is not the gun or the tank, but the lie that lights the fuse.